You see, when an avoidant meets a super empath, something extraordinary happens. At first, they're drawn in not because the empath is loud or demanding, but because their presence feels safe. The super empath doesn't chase attention. They radiate it. They don't need to be chosen. Their energy makes others want to choose them. To the avoidant, this feels magnetic. Here's someone who listens without judgment. Someone who understands pain without needing to fix it. Someone who gives, but not from emptiness, from depth, but that same light, that same warmth, starts to terrify the avoidant, because deep down, the avoidant has built their world on control, on keeping love at a distance, on believing closeness equals danger. And suddenly, this empath walks in, and without even trying, exposes every wall they've built. They start to crave the empath's presence, the calm, the patience, the understanding, but then they pull away. Not because they don't care, but because caring feels too vulnerable, too real. Here's the paradox. The avoidant becomes obsessed not with the empath's body, not with their words, but with the way they feel around them. For the first time, they taste unconditional acceptance, and once they do, they can't unfeel it. They'll try to replace it, distract themselves, detach, but they'll always remember how the empath made them feel seen without performance, loved without earning it. And that's the empath's power, because the super empath doesn't need to chase, fix, or prove. They stand tall in their boundaries, knowing that their love is rare and that not everyone has the courage to hold it. The avoidant may come and go, but they'll never forget. Because the truth is, the empath doesn't just touch your life, they awaken it. They say true magnetism doesn't come from trying to be seen, it comes from being centered. The super empath embodies that truth effortlessly. Their energy draws people in not because they chase validation, but because they move through the world with quiet certainty. There's something deeply calming about someone who knows who they are without needing to prove it. The super empath doesn't compete for attention. They don't manipulate to be chosen. Their confidence is not loud, it's peaceful, and that peace is what captures the avoidant's attention. When an avoidant encounters this kind of energy, it disarms them. They're used to people trying to earn their love, to fix them, to win them over. But the super empath doesn't do that. They see the avoidant's walls, yet they don't fight them. They don't demand entry. They simply remain present, grounded, open, and patient. This kind of energy feels foreign to the avoidant, who's built a lifetime of defenses against being needed or exposed. The empath's stillness feels safe, but it also feels unsettling because it challenges everything the avoidant believes about connection. What makes the super empath magnetic is not just their kindness, it's the depth beneath it. They give from overflow, not emptiness. They listen not to reply, but to understand. They offer empathy without losing their boundaries, and that balance is rare. Most people swing between two extremes, overgiving or self-protecting. The super empath manages to do both. They can care deeply while staying rooted in their own worth. That's what makes their energy irresistible. The avoidant, though they may not understand it consciously, senses that this person is different. The empath doesn't try to heal them or control them, and that creates space. In that space, the avoidant begins to feel something unfamiliar, ease. They don't feel judged. They don't feel pressured. They feel seen in a way that doesn't threaten their independence. And because the empath doesn't chase, the avoidant starts to lean in slowly, cautiously, but inevitably. What keeps the avoidant coming back is not external charm. It's the emotional atmosphere the empath creates. There's something magnetic about someone who can love deeply without expectation. The super empath doesn't hand over their power. They don't attach their worth to being accepted. They love because it's who they are, not because they're trying to be chosen. That's why people, even those afraid of intimacy, can't forget them. This kind of energy shifts the dynamic entirely. The empath becomes a mirror, reflecting back the avoidant's hidden desire for closeness and safety. They don't need to speak it, their presence communicates it, and while the avoidant might resist it, they can't deny it. The pull isn't physical, it's soulful. The empath's authenticity acts like gravity, gently drawing others into their orbit. They don't demand attention, yet they receive it. They don't beg to be loved, yet they are unforgettable. And it all begins with that quiet, unshakable truth they know who they are, and that knowing makes them magnetic. The avoidance relationship with intimacy is complicated. It's not that they don't want closeness. It's that closeness feels unsafe. To someone with an avoidant pattern, love can feel like a trap, vulnerability can feel like exposure, and emotional connection can feel like losing control. When they meet someone like the super empath, that internal conflict becomes impossible to ignore. On one hand, they crave the warmth, the understanding, and the acceptance the empath offers. On the other, they fear what that closeness might uncover: the wounds, the insecurities, the parts of themselves they've kept hidden for so long. The push-pull dynamic begins almost immediately. The avoidant is drawn in by the empath's emotional intelligence. They feel seen without having to explain themselves, which for them is both comforting and terrifying. It's comforting because the empath provides a kind of love that asks for nothing in return: a safe space to exist without judgment. But it's terrifying because to be seen so deeply means there's nowhere left to hide. Every defense, every wall, every escape mechanism begins to weaken under the empath's quiet presence. And for someone who's built their identity around control, that can feel like danger, so they start to withdraw. They tell themselves they need space, that things are moving too fast, that the connection is too intense. But in truth, what they are really pulling away from is the reflection, the mirror the empath holds up to their heart. The super empath doesn't force them to open up. They simply make them feel safe enough to do so. And that safety is what the avoidant isn't used to. It's easier to distance, to distract, to pretend they don't care, because caring feels like surrender. But even as they retreat, the avoidant can't completely detach. Something about the empath lingers: their voice, their calm, the way they didn't demand love but still gave it freely. The avoidant might try to rationalize their feelings or replace the connection, but deep down they know it's rare. They know it touched something real. That's why they oscillate: one moment warm and open, the next cold and distant. They're not trying to hurt the empath. They're trying to protect themselves from the vulnerability the empath awakens. For the super empath, this can be confusing. They sense the depth of the connection, yet they also feel the resistance. But the empath's gift is their awareness. They understand that the avoidance withdrawal is not rejection, it's fear. It's the fear of being consumed, the fear of losing identity in intimacy, the fear of being truly known. And even though it hurts, the empath doesn't chase. They allow space, trusting that love doesn't need to force itself to be real. In this dance between craving and retreating, the avoidant is confronted with a truth they've avoided all along. Love isn't dangerous, it's revealing. And the closer they get to the empath, the more they realize they're not running from the other person, they're running from themselves. Obsession is often misunderstood. It isn't always born from passion or desire. Sometimes it comes from safety. For the avoidant, whose nervous system has been wired to associate closeness with danger, finding someone who feels emotionally safe is almost intoxicating. The super empath provides a kind of connection they didn't think existed: a love that doesn't demand, a presence that doesn't pressure, and a warmth that doesn't fade when things get hard. That safety, that rare sense of acceptance, becomes the very thing the avoidant cannot let go of, no matter how far they try to run. The avoidant is used to relationships where love feels conditional, where affection must be earned, where attention comes with strings, where vulnerability is met with disappointment. But the empath changes that. The empath listens without judgment, sees without trying to fix, and holds space without needing to control. This confuses the avoidant because it goes against everything they've learned about love. They begin to crave that energy not because it feeds their ego, but because it soothes their fear. In the presence of the empath, they feel calm, grounded, and understood in a way they never have before. Yet this calm is unsettling. The avoidant begins to realize that this connection is touching places in them they've long avoided, the parts of them that want to be held, the wounds that want to be seen. That's why their obsession grows. It's not about the empath's appearance, their charm, or even their words. It's about how they feel when they're around them, safe, accepted, and finally at peace. It's an emotional high that no casual connection can replicate, but the paradox is that while they crave this feeling, they also fear it. Emotional safety demands openness. It asks them to show their real self, to lower their guard, to risk being known. And for the avoidant, that's terrifying. So they oscillate, one moment pulled in, the next pushing away. They might disappear, detach, or act indifferent, yet internally they remain fixated. The empath's presence becomes imprinted in their emotional memory. Even when they try to move on, they find themselves comparing every new connection to the depth and comfort they once felt. The avoidance obsession is not rooted in possession, it's rooted in resonance. The empath's energy aligns with something true inside them, something buried under years of emotional defense. And once they've experienced that level of authenticity, it's impossible to forget. They might not admit it, but the empath has awakened a longing. They can't silence the desire to be loved without conditions, to be accepted without performance. That's the power of emotional safety. It doesn't force change, it inspires it. The empath becomes the calm in their storm, the gentle reminder that love doesn't have to hurt. And though the avoidant may drift in and out, their heart will always remember the place it finally felt safe enough to rest. The greatest misconception about empathy is that it's weakness, that those who feel deeply are somehow fragile or naive. But the super empath proves the opposite. Their strength lies not just in their capacity to care, but in their ability to set boundaries while doing so. They understand that love without self-respect becomes self-sacrifice, and compassion without limits becomes depletion. The super empath doesn't give because they are afraid of losing someone. They give because it's in their nature. But they've also learned that preserving their peace is an act of self-love, and that's where their real power begins. Boundaries for the super empath aren't walls, they're filters. They don't shut people out. They simply decide who gets access to their energy. They've been through enough to know that not everyone deserves their understanding. Not everyone can hold the depth they offer. So when they love, it's intentional. They can show kindness without surrendering their worth. They can listen deeply without carrying someone else's pain as their own. And that balance, that ability to love from a full cup instead of an empty one, makes them magnetic. When the avoidant meets this kind of strength, it's disorienting. They're used to people who overextend, who bend themselves in half just to be chosen. But the empath doesn't chase. They don't beg to be loved. They know their value, and they refuse to trade their peace for proximity. This is where the dynamic shifts, because the avoidant, who thrives on control and distance, suddenly realizes they can't manipulate this kind of love. The empath's boundaries communicate something silently powerful. I want connection, but I don't need chaos to have it. It's this calm certainty that captivates the avoidant. The empath can walk away if the relationship becomes one-sided. Not out of anger, but out of self-respect. They understand that love is not measured by endurance, but by reciprocity, and when they choose to stay, it's a choice rooted in authenticity, not fear. This is what separates the super empath from the overgiver. They no longer confuse self-abandonment with devotion. For the avoidant, who often tests people to see how far they'll go, the empath's boundaries are both confronting and alluring. They reveal that love can exist alongside independence. They show that strength isn't about withdrawing or detaching, but about staying open without losing yourself. The empath doesn't shut down to protect themselves. They stay soft and strong at the same time. That's the kind of power that shifts dynamics. It teaches others that real love doesn't demand the loss of self. In every boundary the empath sets, there's a message. My heart is open, but my energy is sacred. That message is what lingers long after they're gone. Because people may forget the words you said or the things you did, but they never forget how your strength made them feel safe, respected, and inspired to rise to your level. There's a difference between attachment and impact. Attachment clings, impact transforms. The super empath doesn't just enter someone's life, they awaken it. Their love is not about ownership or control, it's about illumination. They have a way of seeing into the parts of a person that even they've forgotten. And that's what makes their presence unforgettable. When the avoidant meets a super empath, they don't just experience affection, they experience awareness. The empath's love holds up a mirror, reflecting not who the avoidant pretends to be, but who they truly are underneath the layers of defense. The super empath doesn't force change, they don't preach or demand growth. Their power is quiet. It's in how they love, how they listen, how they make others feel seen without judgment. In their presence, truth becomes harder to run from. The avoidant, who spent so long guarding themselves, begins to feel something they can't intellectualize, the pull to open. It's subtle at first, a softening, a curiosity, a moment of stillness where they realize that maybe closeness isn't the threat they thought it was. That realization doesn't come from pressure, it comes from the empath's steady presence. Even if the connection doesn't last, its effect does. The empath's love lingers because it wasn't transactional. It wasn't about what they could gain, but about what they could give authentically. That kind of love imprints itself deeply. The avoidant might move on, meet others, or retreat back into their solitude. But somewhere in the back of their mind, they'll remember the one who made them feel safe enough to drop the mask. They'll remember what it felt like to be understood without explanation. That memory becomes a reference point, proof that genuine connection exists. For the empath, this is where maturity shows. They understand that not every love story is meant to end in forever. Sometimes their role is to awaken, not to remain. Their gift is to remind others of their capacity to love and be loved, even if the other person isn't ready to meet them there. It's a bittersweet truth, but the empath accepts it with grace. They know that their energy plants seeds of self-awareness, healing, and courage that may bloom long after they've walked away. The avoidant, often unaware of the transformation taking place, begins to carry traces of the empath's energy. They might become more patient, more introspective, more open to connection. That's the empath's silent legacy. They inspire change not through control, but through example. They don't just teach love, they embody it. And when someone has felt that kind of presence, ordinary connections start to feel hollow. That's why true impact is awakening, not attachment. The empath doesn't leave people addicted to them, they leave them remembering themselves. And that is why, even when the relationship ends, its lesson doesn't. The avoidant moves forward, carrying with them a new truth. Love can be safe, and vulnerability can be strength. In the end, the story between the avoidant and the super empath is not one of loss, but of awakening. The empath reminds the avoidant that love isn't something to fear, it's something to feel. And even if their paths part, the transformation remains. Because real connections don't always stay. Sometimes they simply show us who we are meant to become. Thank you for listening, for opening your heart, and for remembering that love, in its purest form, is never wasted. It always leaves us wiser, stronger, and more alive.